I learned the hard way that buying a house in Riverside, Illinois, was the worst decision of my life. And it all started when Margaret Reynolds knocked on my door with that insufferable smile plastered across her face. "Mr. Logan Oliver, I presume," she said, holding a clipboard like it was the Holy Grail. "I'm Margaret Reynolds, president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. Welcome to the neighborhood. I just need to go over a few community guidelines with you." I should have slammed the door right then. Instead, I invited her in like an idiot, offering her coffee while she sat at my kitchen table and proceeded to list off approximately 700 rules I'd apparently agreed to when I signed the closing papers. No flags except American flags. No lawn decorations except during approved holidays. No exterior modifications without board approval. The list went on forever. "And absolutely no generators," she said, tapping her pen on that point with particular emphasis. "They're unsightly and noisy. We've had complaints in the past." "I haven't even installed one," I said, laughing it off. "Why would I need a generator?" Margaret's smile turned cold. "Just making sure you're aware, Mr. Oliver. Some people think the rules don't apply to them. I can assure you they do." That was 6 months ago, back in March. Now it was September, and I just finished installing a brand new Generac generator next to my garage. The technician had left an hour ago, and I was admiring the installation when I heard the clicking of heels on my driveway. "Mr. Oliver," Margaret's voice could strip paint off walls. "What is that monstrosity?" I turned around slowly, enjoying the vein throbbing in her forehead. "It's a generator, Margaret. We had 3 power outages this summer, if you recall. The last one spoiled everything in my fridge. I specifically told you generators are prohibited under Section 12, subsection 4 of our HOA bylaws." She was already typing on her phone, probably photographing my generator from every conceivable angle. "I read the bylaws again last week," I said calmly. "Section 12, subsection 4 says nothing about permanently installed backup generators. It mentions portable generators and temporary equipment. This is a permanent installation, wired directly into my electrical panel with an automatic transfer switch. Completely different thing." Her face turned an impressive shade of purple. "Don't play semantic games with me. The spirit of the rule is clear." "The letter of the law is what matters, Margaret. I'm an attorney. I know how to read a contract." That was a lie. I was a high school history teacher. But she didn't know that, and watching her sputter was worth the deception. "We'll see about this," she hissed, storming off my property. The next morning, I found a formal letter in my mailbox. The HOA board was demanding I remove the generator within 14 days or face daily fines of $200. I crumpled the letter and tossed it in the recycling bin. They could demand all they wanted. My neighbor, Frank Morrison, wandered over that afternoon while I was mowing the lawn. Frank was 65, retired from some manufacturing job, and had lived in Willowbrook Estates since the development was built in 1998. He was one of the few people in the neighborhood who'd actually talked to me. "Saw Margaret leaving your place yesterday," he said. "Let me guess. The generator." "She's threatening fines," I said, killing the mower engine. $200 a day." Frank whistled low. "She did the same thing to the Hendersons 4 years ago. They installed a generator after Mrs. Henderson's dialysis machine lost power during a storm. Margaret fined them until they couldn't afford the mortgage anymore. They had to sell." "That's insane. How is that legal?" "HOA bylaws or contracts. Technically, she's within her rights even if the rules are ridiculous." Frank glanced back at his house. "Between you and me, I'd love to see someone finally stand up to her. But be careful. Margaret doesn't lose gracefully." I thought about Frank's warning as I finished the yard work. The more I considered it, the angrier I got. I'd saved for 8 years to afford this house. I'd left my cramped apartment in Chicago, dreaming of having my own space, my own yard, some peace and quiet. And now some power-hungry tyrant with a clipboard was trying to bully me out of basic preparations for emergencies. That night, I did what any reasonable person would do. I started researching. I pulled up the original HOA bylaws, the Illinois compiled statutes dealing with homeowner associations, and every court case I could find involving HOA disputes. I stayed up until 3 in the morning, making notes, highlighting sections, building my case. The generator clause was ambiguous at best. Section 12, subsection 4 read, "No temporary generators, portable power equipment, or similar noise-producing machinery shall be operated on any property except during power outages or emergencies, and then only for reasonable periods." Nothing about permanent, professionally installed backup power systems. Margaret was interpreting the rule to mean what she wanted it to mean. I drafted a response letter, citing the specific language, pointing out the distinction between temporary and permanent equipment, and noting that Illinois law protected homeowners' rights to maintain backup power systems for safety purposes. I sent copies to Margaret, to the HOA board, and to my own records. Her response arrived 3 days later. The board had voted 4-1 to uphold the fine schedule. I was now officially in violation. The fines would start accruing in 10 days. "Let them try," I muttered, filing the letter away. Work kept me busy for the next week. I taught American history to bored sophomores at Riverside High School, graded papers about the Constitutional Convention, and tried not to think about the impending financial assault from my HOA. But on day 11, another letter arrived. I now owed $200, payable immediately. Day 12, another $200. By the end of the month, they claimed I owed $6,000. I didn't pay a cent. October brought cooler weather and increasingly threatening letters from the HOA. Margaret had escalated from formal notices to certified mail from their attorney, Stephanie Walsh of Walsh and Associates. The law firm demanded payment of accumulated fines, now totaling $12,000, plus legal fees of $3,000. I was given 30 days to comply or they'd place a lien on my property. I called a real attorney this time. Jeremy Parker specialized in HOA disputes and agreed to review my case for a flat consultation fee. We met at his office in Oak Park on a gray Thursday afternoon. "You've got a decent argument," Jeremy said, spreading my documents across his desk. "The bylaw language is vague. A good judge might side with you, but here's the problem. HOA litigation is expensive. Even if you win, you're looking at $20,000 to $30,000 in legal fees. Maybe more if they appeal. And HOAs have deep pockets because they're funded by everyone's dues. They can bleed you dry even if they're wrong. So what are my options? Pay the fines and remove the generator, or fight it and hope you can afford to win?" He leaned back in his chair. "There is a third option. File a countersuit claiming the HOA is acting outside its authority and demand they cover your legal fees. But that's risky. If you lose, you pay everything." I left his office feeling sick. The system was rigged. Margaret knew she could bully people because fighting back cost more than most homeowners could afford. The Hendersons had learned that lesson. Now it was my turn. When I got home, Frank was waiting on my front porch. "You've got bigger problems," he said without preamble. "The board called an emergency meeting tonight. They're voting on whether to foreclose on your property." "They can't do that. I'm current on my mortgage. HOA lien takes priority in Illinois. If you owe more than a certain amount and don't pay, they can force a sale." Frank looked genuinely worried. I'm not saying they'll win, but Margaret's been pushing the board hard. She wants to make an example of you. The meeting was at 7 o'clock at the community center, a bland brick building at the entrance to our subdivision. I arrived at 6:45 and found the parking lot already half full. Apparently, my impending doom was popular entertainment. The board sat at a long table at the front of the room. Margaret held the center position, flanked by 4 other board members. Tom Guthrie, a dentist who looked perpetually uncomfortable. Patricia Knowles, a retired school principal with kind eyes. David Chen, who owned a plumbing business, and Brenda Walters, Margaret's obvious ally and second in command. About 30 residents filled the chairs. I recognized a few faces from neighborhood cookouts and chance encounters at the grocery store. Frank sat in the back row, giving me a supportive nod as I found a seat. Margaret called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. We're here to discuss the ongoing violation at 847 Maple Drive, property of Lucas Oliver. Mr. Oliver has refused to remove an unauthorized generator despite repeated warnings and accumulating fines now totaling $14,400. The board must decide how to proceed. I'd like to address the board, I said, standing up. Margaret's expression could have frozen water. You'll have an opportunity during the public comment period, Mr. Oliver. Please sit down. When is the public comment period? After the board votes. That's convenient, I said, staying on my feet. You vote to destroy my life, then let me talk about it afterward. Tom Guthrie shifted uncomfortably. Margaret, maybe we should hear from Mr. Oliver first. This seems like a significant action to take without hearing both sides. The procedure is clear, Tom. We vote, then allow comment. Margaret's tone suggested the matter was closed, but Patricia Knowles spoke up. I agree with Tom. This isn't a normal fine situation. We're talking about foreclosure. Let's hear what Mr. Oliver has to say. Margaret looked like she'd bitten into a lemon, but she nodded curtly. Fine. You have 5 minutes, Mr. Oliver. I walked to the front of the room, my heart hammering. Public speaking had never been my strength, but I thought about the Hendersons, about Frank's warning, about Margaret's smug certainty that she'd already won. My name is Lucas Oliver. I've lived in Willowbrook Estates for 6 months. I bought my house because I wanted to be part of a community. Instead, I've been harassed, threatened, and fined thousands of dollars for installing a safety device that's completely legal under both state law and a fair reading of our HOA bylaws. I pulled out my copy of the rules. Section 12, Subsection 4 prohibits temporary generators and portable equipment. My generator is permanent, professionally installed, and meets all building codes. The village of Riverside issued a permit. ComEd approved the installation. But Margaret Reynolds has decided, unilaterally, that the rule means something it doesn't say. The intent is obvious, Margaret interrupted. The intent is what you claim it is, I shot back. Contracts are interpreted by their plain language, not by what one party wishes they said. If the board wanted to prohibit all generators, permanent or temporary, the bylaw should say that. It doesn't. David Chen leaned forward. Mr. Oliver, why is the generator so important to you? Is it just about the principle? Partially, I admitted. But also because last July we lost power for 16 hours. Everything in my fridge spoiled. I had no air conditioning in 90-degree heat. My security system went down. I couldn't charge my phone. And I realized that I was completely unprepared for something that's becoming more common every year. So yes, I want a generator. But more than that, I want to live in a community where reasonable safety precautions aren't treated like crimes. Patricia Knowles was nodding slowly. Tom Guthrie looked sympathetic. Even David Chen seemed to be reconsidering, but Margaret's expression hadn't changed. "Are you finished, Mr. Oliver?" "Almost. If this board votes to foreclose on my property, I'll fight it. I'll hire attorneys, file countersuits, and make this as expensive and public as possible. I'll contact every news outlet in Chicago and tell them how Willowbrook Estates forces out homeowners for having backup power. I'll drag this association through the mud until everyone knows what kind of petty tyranny you're running here. Or, you can admit the bylaw is ambiguous, clarify it going forward, and drop the fines. Your choice." The room was dead silent. Margaret's face had gone from purple to white. "Threatening the board is not appropriate, Mr. Oliver. It's not a threat, it's a promise." I returned to my seat, my legs shaking. The board voted 15 minutes later. Margaret and Brenda voted to proceed with foreclosure. Tom, Patricia, and David voted against it. The motion failed. Margaret adjourned the meeting with barely contained rage, slamming her gavel so hard I thought it might break. Residents filed out slowly. Several people stopped to shake my hand or offer quiet words of support. Frank clapped me on the shoulder. "That took guts, kid, but watch your back. Margaret doesn't forget." He was right. Over the next 2 weeks, I received 3 parking tickets for allegedly leaving my trash cans visible from the street beyond the permitted hours. Code enforcement visited my property twice, checking for violations. Margaret herself drove by my house at least once a day, slowing down to stare at my generator with undisguised loathing. But the fines stopped accruing. The board had voted 3-2 to freeze the fine schedule pending a full legal review of the generator bylaw. Margaret was losing control, and she knew it. November arrived with freezing rain and the first real storm of the season. I was grading papers on a Thursday evening when the lights flickered, died, and came back on. I barely noticed. Then they flickered again, died again. This time, after about 10 seconds, I heard a rumble from outside. My generator had kicked on automatically, just as designed. The lights in my house glowed steady and strong through my window. I could see the rest of the neighborhood plunged into darkness. Street lights were out. Porch lights were out. Every house on Maple Drive sat in complete blackness except mine. I should have felt satisfied, vindicated. Instead, I felt a creeping sense of unease. I grabbed a flashlight and went outside. The rain was coming down hard, driven by gusting wind that bent the trees nearly horizontal. My generator hummed reassuringly beside the garage, its status lights glowing green. Frank's house was 3 doors down. I jogged through the rain and knocked on his door. He answered with a flashlight in hand. "Power's out," he said unnecessarily. I noticed. "You doing okay?" "Yeah, I've got candles and flashlights. I'll be fine." He glanced past me toward my brightly lit house. "Nice to see that generator working, though." "How long do outages usually last around here?" Frank shrugged. "Could be an hour, could be all night. Depends on what caused it. Why?" "Just wondering." But I wasn't just wondering. I was remembering something David Chen had said during the board meeting. David owned a plumbing business. He'd mentioned, in passing, that several homes in Willowbrook Estates had chronic basement flooding issues because of the high water table. I went home and tried to focus on my grading, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Around midnight, I gave up on sleep and started researching the subdivision's history. Willowbrook Estates had been built on former farmland, most of it low-lying and prone to water accumulation. The developer had installed sump pumps in nearly every basement as a condition of the building permits. Those sump pumps ran on electricity that was currently out across the entire neighborhood except for my house. I pulled on rain gear and grabbed my heavy-duty flashlight. The storm was still raging, but I needed to check something. I walked down Maple Drive, playing my flashlight across the houses. Everything looked normal at first, but when I reached the end of the street and turned onto Oak Lane, I saw the first signs of trouble. Water was seeping out from under the garage door of 1124 Oak Lane. Not a lot, but enough to create a visible stream running down the driveway. I moved to the next house. Same thing. And the next. By the time I'd walked 3 blocks, I'd counted at least 15 houses with water visibly escaping from basements or garages. Margaret Reynolds lived at 1247 Oak Lane, a large colonial with a perfectly manicured lawn and a decorative lamppost that wasn't currently lit. I walked up her driveway, my flashlight beam cutting through the rain. Water was definitely flowing from beneath her garage door, a steady stream that looked worse than the others I'd seen. I should have knocked on her door, warned her, been the bigger person. Instead, I stood in her driveway, watching the water flow, and felt absolutely nothing. She'd tried to fine me into bankruptcy. She'd attempted to foreclose on my home. She'd made my life miserable for months over a generator that was now the only thing keeping my sump pump running and my basement dry. I walked home through the storm, climbed into bed, and slept better than I had in weeks. The power came back on at 7 in the morning. I was making coffee when I heard the first scream. It was distant, muffled by walls and rain that was still falling steadily, but unmistakable. Then another scream, and another. I took my coffee to the front porch and watched the show. Up and down the street, people were emerging from their houses, looking dazed and horrified. Frank appeared on his porch, saw me, and shook his head slowly before going back inside. By 9 o'clock, there were at least 6 restoration company trucks in the neighborhood. White vans with company logos promising water damage repair, mold remediation, emergency services. I watched them come and go, noting which houses they stopped at. Margaret's house got 3 trucks at once. My doorbell rang at 10. I opened it to find Patricia Knowles standing there looking exhausted. "Lucas, do you have power?" she asked. "Generator kicked on when the grid went down," I said. "I've had power all night. Your basement is dry, bone dry. Sump pump never stopped running." Patricia's shoulders sagged. "Can I come in? I need to sit down." I brought her inside and made her tea. She sat at my kitchen table, the same place Margaret had sat 6 months earlier, and told me what had happened. "The power went out at about 8 last night. Most people went to bed, figured it would come back on soon. But it didn't come back until this morning. By then, basements all over the neighborhood had flooded. Mine has 4 inches of water. Some people have more than a foot. Margaret's basement has 18 inches. "That's terrible," I said, trying to sound sincere. "Your generator kept your sump pump running all night," Patricia said. "You're probably the only house in Willowbrook Estates without water damage. I guess that's why I installed it." She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Margaret is going to blame you for this somehow. You know that, right? How is it my fault that the power went out? It's not. But she'll find a way to make it about you." Patricia sipped her tea. "I'm going to propose a bylaw amendment at the next board meeting. I want to explicitly allow permanent backup generators. After last night, I think the votes will be there. What about Margaret? She can vote however she wants. She only gets 1 vote, same as the rest of us." Patricia stood up, steadier now. "Thank you for the tea, and Lucas. I'm sorry about how you've been treated. It wasn't right." After she left, I spent the day watching the restoration crews work. The rain finally stopped around noon, leaving the neighborhood soaked and miserable. I counted 23 houses with visible flood damage. Frank's was one of them, though he assured me it was minor when I checked on him. "Just an inch or 2, he said, showing me his basement. "I've got wet dry vac. I'll have it cleaned up by tomorrow. But some folks, man, The Pattersons have 6 inches and it got into their finished basement. Ruined everything. Margaret's apparently got it worse. Her whole basement is finished with carpet, drywall, the works. It's all destroyed. Insurance will cover it, won't it? Maybe. Depends on her policy. Sump pump failure is sometimes excluded. Even if it's covered, the deductible is probably 5 or 10 grand, and her premiums will skyrocket. Frank gave me a look. You know what the funny thing is? If Margaret hadn't been so obsessed with banning generators, this might not have happened. People could have had backup power. Kept their sump pumps running. But she was so determined to enforce that stupid rule that she screwed everyone, including herself. The next board meeting was scheduled for the first Tuesday in December. I didn't plan to attend, but Patricia called me the day before and asked me to come. I want you there when we vote on the generator amendment, she said. It'll mean more if you're present. So I showed up, taking the same seat I'd occupied in October. The room was packed again, but the mood was different. People looked tired, stressed, defeated. I recognized several faces from my nighttime walk during the storm. They were the ones who'd had water streaming from their basements. Margaret looked worse than I'd ever seen her. Her hair, usually perfect, was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She had dark circles under her eyes. Her clothes, while clean, looked rumpled. She called the meeting to order without her usual commanding tone. First order of business, Patricia said, not waiting for Margaret to control the agenda. I'm proposing an amendment to Section 12, subsection 4 of the HOA bylaws. The amendment would explicitly permit permanent, professionally installed backup generators that meet local building codes and utility company standards. I move that we vote on this amendment tonight. Seconded, Tom Guthrie said immediately. Margaret's knuckles were white on her gavel. We should table this until we can study it more thoroughly. We've studied it enough, David Chen said. We all know what happened during the storm. If people had generators, their basements wouldn't have flooded. I vote yes on the amendment. I vote yes, Tom said. Yes, Patricia said. Everyone looked at Brenda Walters. She'd been Margaret's reliable ally through every vote, but now she hesitated. I vote yes, she said finally, not meeting Margaret's eyes. The ayes have it, Patricia said. The amendment passes 4-1. Margaret looked like she might cry or explode or both. This meeting is adjourned, she said, standing abruptly and walking out without another word. The room erupted in conversation. Several people approached me, thanking me for standing my ground, telling me I'd been right all along. Frank shook my hand. You did it, kid. You actually beat her. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow. Yes, I'd won. The generator was legal now. The fines would be refunded, Patricia assured me. But I'd also stood in Margaret's driveway during the storm and watched water pour from her house without warning her. I'd gone home and slept while her basement filled with water. I'd done to her exactly what she tried to do to me, used the rules and circumstances to hurt someone I didn't like. The difference was, I told myself, she'd started it. She'd been the aggressor. I just defended myself. But late at night, when I couldn't sleep, I wondered if that was really true or just what I needed to believe. December passed in a strange calm. The neighborhood was busy with repairs. Restoration crews were still working on some of the worst-hit houses. Margaret's house had a commercial dumpster in the driveway, filled with ruined carpet, water-damaged drywall, and destroyed furniture. I saw her occasionally, always from a distance, always looking diminished somehow. Frank told me she'd filed an insurance claim, but it had been denied. Her policy excluded sump pump failures. She was paying for everything out of pocket, and the estimates were running over $40,000. Her husband, a quiet man named Richard who worked in insurance sales, had apparently moved out temporarily to stay with his sister. The stress was destroying their marriage. I should have felt satisfied. Instead, I felt sick. The final board meeting of the year was scheduled for the third Tuesday in December. I almost didn't go, but curiosity got the better of me. When I arrived, the community center was half empty. Maybe 15 people in the audience compared to the packed houses of previous meetings. Margaret wasn't at the board table. In her place, Patricia Knowles sat in the center seat. "Where's Margaret?" someone called out. Patricia cleared her throat. Margaret Reynolds submitted her resignation from the board last week, effective immediately. She cited personal reasons. "I've been elected as interim president until the next regular election in March." The news hit me harder than I expected. I'd wanted to win, wanted to keep my generator, wanted to stop the fines. But I hadn't wanted to drive her off the board entirely. Or maybe I had, and now I was feeling guilty about getting what I wanted. After the meeting, I caught up with Patricia in the parking lot. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "How is Margaret doing, really?" Patricia studied me for a long moment. "Not well. The flood damage costs are significant. Her marriage is strained, and I think losing the board vote broke something in her. She'd been president for 12 years. Being on this board was her entire identity. Now she has nothing. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Didn't you?" Patricia's tone wasn't accusing, just honest. "You threatened to make this public and expensive. You fought her at every turn. You won. This is what winning looks like sometimes." She drove away, leaving me standing in the cold December air, feeling more conflicted than ever. Christmas came and went. I spent it alone, having declined invitations from a few colleagues at school. Frank invited me over for dinner, and I accepted, grateful for the company. We ate turkey and watched football and didn't talk about Margaret or the HOA or any of it. But on my way home, I drove past Margaret's house. The dumpster was gone. The windows were dark. A "for sale" sign stood in the front yard. I pulled into her driveway, not sure what I was doing. The house looked abandoned, though I knew it hadn't been formally vacated yet. I sat there for 10 minutes, engine running, heat blasting, trying to decide whether to knock on the door. What would I even say? "Sorry your basement flooded. Sorry I didn't warn you. Sorry I won." The front door opened. Margaret stood there in a bathrobe, looking older than her 50-some years. She walked down the driveway toward my truck. I rolled down the window. "Come to gloat?" she asked. Her voice was flat, empty of the venom I'd grown accustomed to. "No, I saw the sign. I wanted to see if you were okay." "Do I look okay?" She laughed bitterly. "My basement is destroyed. My insurance denied the claim. My husband left me. I had to resign from the board in disgrace. And now I'm selling my house at a loss because I can't afford the repairs. So no, Lucas, I'm not okay." "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. "Are you? Because you won. You kept your precious generator. You turned the board against me. You got everything you wanted." She wrapped her robe tighter against the cold. "I hope it was worth it." "It wasn't about winning," I said. "It was about not being bullied out of my home. That's what I was doing, protecting the neighborhood. Keeping standards, making sure people followed the rules. Someone has to, or everything falls apart." She looked back at her dark house. "At least that's what I told myself. Maybe I was just a bully with a clipboard. Maybe you were right and I was wrong. Doesn't change where I ended up." I didn't know what to say to that. We stood in silence for a moment, the truck engine rumbling between us. "I could have warned you," I said finally. "During the storm. I walked by your house and saw the water. I could have knocked on your door. I didn't." Margaret looked at me with something like surprise. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because it's true. Because I let your basement flood when I could have stopped it. I was angry and I wanted you to suffer. I'm not proud of it, but that's what happened." She studied me for a long moment. "You know what?" I don't blame you, I would have done the same thing. Hell, I tried to do worse to you, I tried to take your house. She turned to go, then paused. We're both terrible people, Lucas, but at least you're honest about it. She walked back inside, closing the door behind her. I sat in her driveway for another 5 minutes, then drove home. January brought snow and a fresh start. Patricia Knowles proved to be a far better board president than Margaret had been. She focused on actual neighborhood issues like street repairs, snow removal, and updating the community center. She didn't patrol the streets looking for violations. She didn't send threatening letters. She treated people like adults instead of children who needed constant supervision. The generator amendment was formally adopted into the bylaws. I received a refund check for the fines I'd refused to pay, along with a formal apology letter from the board. Several other homeowners installed generators that winter. David Chen even gave me a discount on some plumbing work, thanking me for standing up to Margaret. Frank and I became good friends. We had dinner once a week, watched sports, complained about property taxes and the cold. He'd lived through 3 HOA presidents before Margaret and figured he'd outlive Patricia too. The trick, he told me, is remembering that your neighbors are just people. Scared, flawed people trying to control the few things they can control. Margaret forgot that. Don't make the same mistake. I thought about his words a lot. I thought about Margaret's face in her driveway, about the for sale sign, about the cost of winning. I'd gotten my generator. I'd kept my house. I'd defeated the bully. But I'd also stood by while someone's basement flooded, and I'd have to live with that. February arrived with a thaw and news that Margaret's house had sold. A young couple with 2 kids bought it, and I saw them moving in on a Saturday afternoon. They looked happy, excited, full of hope. I wondered how long it would take before the HOA did something to crush that optimism. Then I remembered that Patricia was in charge now, and things were different. Maybe they'd be okay. I ran into Margaret one last time, completely by accident at a grocery store in Oak Park. She was in the produce section, examining apples with the same intense focus she'd once applied to HOA bylaws. She saw me at the same time I saw her. "Lucas," she said, neutral. "Margaret, how are you?" "Surviving. Richard and I are trying couples therapy. We'll see." She put an apple in her cart. "I heard the house sold." "Yeah, I saw the new owners moving in. They seem nice." "Good." She hesitated, then said, "I was out of line. With the generator, the fines, all of it." I was so convinced I was right that I couldn't see how unreasonable I was being. My therapist has had some thoughts about that. I wasn't exactly innocent either. "No, you weren't, but you weren't wrong." She gave me a small, sad smile. "Take care of that neighborhood, Lucas. It's a good place, even if I forgot that for a while." She walked away, pushing her cart toward the meat department. I never saw her again. Spring came early that year. By March, the snow was gone and the grass was turning green. The regular board elections were held, and Patricia was elected to a full term as president. Tom, David, and Brenda retained their seats. A new member, Carol Zimmerman, was elected to fill Margaret's vacant position. She was a retired engineer who promised to focus on infrastructure improvements and common-sense rule enforcement. She was elected unanimously. Life in Willowbrook Estates settled into a comfortable rhythm. I taught my classes, graded my papers, hung out with Frank, and enjoyed my house without the constant fear of HOA harassment. The generator sat beside my garage, humming to life during power outages, keeping my basement dry and my food fresh and my life comfortable. It was exactly what I'd wanted. But sometimes, late at night, I'd think about Margaret standing in her driveway in a bathrobe, telling me we were both terrible people. I'd think about the water pouring from her basement while I did nothing. I'd think about the cost of being right, of winning, of standing my ground. I didn't regret installing the generator. I didn't regret fighting the fines. But I did regret not knocking on her door during the storm. I regretted watching someone suffer when I could have helped, even if that someone had been trying to hurt me. I'd learned something important that night, standing in the rain, watching the water flow. I'd learned that revenge is easy, that letting someone fail is effortless, that doing nothing is the simplest choice of all. I'd also learned that I didn't like the person I became when I made those choices. The story could end there, with lessons learned and character growth and all the tidy resolution stories are supposed to have. But life isn't that clean. What actually happened was more complicated and, in a strange way, more hopeful. In April, I was at the hardware store buying mulch for my garden beds when I overheard a woman asking the clerk about generators. She was probably 30, dressed in business casual, looking stressed and overwhelmed. "I just bought a house in Forest Park," she was saying. "The inspector recommended a backup generator because of the electrical issues in the neighborhood. But they're so expensive, and I've already maxed out my budget on the down payment." The clerk was explaining financing options when I interrupted. "Excuse me, sorry. I couldn't help overhearing. I recently installed a generator. If you want, I can explain what I learned during the process. Might help you make a decision." She looked relieved. "That would be amazing, thank you." We talked for 20 minutes. I told her about the research I'd done, the different models and their pros and cons, the installation costs, the ongoing maintenance. I gave her the name of the technician who'd installed mine and warned her about checking HOA bylaws if her neighborhood had an association. "Actually," she said, "my real estate agent mentioned the HOA, something about rules and restrictions. I haven't really looked at the bylaws yet." "Do it," I said, "before you install anything. And if the language is vague or unclear, get it clarified in writing. Trust me on that." She thanked me profusely and left with a list of recommendations and a much better understanding of what she was getting into. The clerk, an older guy named Pete who'd apparently heard my whole saga from other customers, grinned at me. "That was a good thing you just did," he said. "Yeah, well, I learned some things the hard way. Might as well help someone else avoid the same mistakes." I thought about that conversation for days afterward. I'd spent 6 months fighting Margaret, another month feeling guilty about it, and now here I was, actually using what I'd learned to help a stranger. It felt good. Better than winning had felt. Better than revenge had felt. Just quietly, simply good. In May, Frank had a minor heart attack. Nothing life-threatening, but scary enough to land him in the hospital for 3 days. I visited him every evening after work, bringing him contraband, decent coffee, and books from his house. His kids lived out of state and couldn't get to Illinois immediately, so I watered his plants, collected his mail, and made sure his house didn't get flagged by the HOA for any of the petty violations Margaret used to obsess over. When he got home, I brought him groceries and made him dinner. We ate spaghetti at his kitchen table while he complained about hospital food and low-sodium diets. "You didn't have to do all this," he said. "Yeah, I did. You've been a good friend to me. This is what friends do. Still, I appreciate it." He twirled pasta on his fork. "You know what's funny? Margaret used to organize neighborhood meal trains when people were sick or had babies. She was actually good at that kind of thing before she got so obsessed with enforcement. I think she forgot that being part of a community means helping people, not just policing them." "I think we all forget that sometimes," I said. The school year ended in June. Summer stretched ahead of me, empty and promising. I spent my days reading on my porch, tending my garden, and occasionally driving into Chicago to visit museums or catch a baseball game at Wrigley Field. It was peaceful, Boring, maybe, but in the best possible way. Then, in July, almost exactly a year after the power outage that had started everything, another storm rolled through. This one was worse than the last, a massive thunderstorm that brought down trees and power lines across the entire western suburbs. The electricity went out at 3 in the afternoon and stayed out. My generator kicked on immediately. I was reading in the living room when I heard the familiar rumble, saw the lights flicker and stabilize, felt the air conditioning continue its blessed work. Through my window, I watched the neighborhood go dark. I thought about the previous July. About walking through the rain and seeing the water flowing from Margaret's basement. About doing nothing. About the choice I'd made and the guilt I still carried. Then I grabbed my phone and started making calls. I called Frank first. "Power's out. Do you need anything?" "I'm good, got flashlights and candles. My basement's fine, learned my lesson about battery backup for the Sump pump." "Good, stay safe." I called Patricia next, just checking in. "Everything okay? We're fine, thank you. We installed a generator in March, best decision we ever made." She paused. "You're calling to make sure people are okay, aren't you?" Seemed like the right thing to do. "You're a good person, Lucas. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I worked my way through my mental list of neighbors, especially the ones I knew had been hit hard by the previous year's flooding. Most people were prepared this time. They had battery backups, portable sump pumps, or had installed generators of their own. A few needed help, and I coordinated with Frank and David Chen to make sure everyone had what they needed. By the time the power came back on, 8 hours later, no basements had flooded. No property had been destroyed. The neighborhood had learned its lesson and prepared. People had worked together, checked on each other, acted like an actual community instead of just houses on the same street. That night, I sat on my porch with a beer, listening to my generator wind down as the grid power stabilized. I thought about Margaret, wherever she was, and hoped she was doing okay. I thought about the woman in the hardware store and hoped she'd gotten her generator installed. I thought about Frank and his heart attack, and how easily we can lose the things that matter. Mostly, I thought about the fact that I'd spent a year being angry, being vindictive, being right, and being miserable. And then I'd spent a few months actually trying to be a decent person, and suddenly everything felt lighter, easier, better. The generator hummed quietly beside my garage, ready for the next outage, the next emergency, the next test. But more importantly, I was ready too. Ready to be the kind of neighbor I wanted to have. Ready to help instead of hurt. Ready to build a community instead of just defending my territory. It wasn't a perfect ending. Margaret's basement had still flooded. Her marriage had still fallen apart. The damage I'd done by doing nothing couldn't be undone, but I could do better going forward. I could be better. And maybe, in the end, that was the point. August brought Frank's 76th birthday. A group of neighbors threw him a surprise party in the community center. Patricia organized it. David provided the catering, and about 40 people showed up to celebrate a man who'd lived in Willowbrook Estates for 27 years and had been kind to everyone he'd met. Frank made a speech, thanking everyone and getting emotional in that way old men do when they're overwhelmed by affection. He looked at me at one point and said, "I'm glad you didn't let them drive you out, kid. This neighborhood needed someone willing to stand up to the BS. But I'm even more glad you figured out that standing up doesn't mean standing alone." We ate cake and told stories and celebrated someone who deserved celebrating. It was the kind of community event Margaret used to organize, back before she'd become obsessed with control. It was the kind of evening that made me glad I'd stayed, glad I'd fought, glad I'd won. As I drove home that night, I passed 1247 Oak Lane. The new family had painted the shutters blue and installed a swing set in the backyard. Kids' bikes lay scattered on the front lawn, colorful and chaotic and alive. The house looked happy, lived in, loved. I thought about Margaret one last time, sending her a silent wish that she'd found her own version of peace, her own swing set, her own fresh start. Then I drove home to my house with the generator beside the garage, the house I'd fought for and won. The house that had taught me more about winning and losing than I'd ever wanted to learn. The generator sat there in the fading summer light, a monument to stubbornness and survival. But also, I hoped, a reminder. A reminder that sometimes being right isn't enough. Sometimes winning comes at a cost. And sometimes the best thing you can do is knock on a door during a storm, even if the person inside once tried to destroy you. I didn't know if I'd make that choice if I had to do it over again. I wanted to believe I would. I wanted to believe I'd learned enough, grown enough, changed enough. But honestly, I wasn't sure. Maybe none of us are sure what we do until the lights go out and the rain starts falling and we have to decide, in that moment, who we want to be. All I knew for certain was that my basement was dry, my house was safe, and I'd survived my first year in Willowbrook Estates. The HOA had tried to break me and failed. I tried to break myself with guilt and regret and mostly failed at that too. And now, finally, I was just living, just being a neighbor, just trying to do better. My generator hummed its quiet song of preparedness, and I went inside to plan tomorrow's lesson about the Constitutional Convention and the delicate balance between rules and freedom, between order and tyranny, between standing your ground and knowing when to help someone else stand on theirs. The lesson, I thought, applied to more than just history. It applied to life in an HOA, in a neighborhood, in a country, in a world where we all have to figure out how to live together despite our differences. Sometimes that means fighting for what's right. Sometimes it means admitting when you're wrong. And sometimes, most importantly, it means knocking on a door during a storm, even when everything inside you says to walk away. I'd learned that lesson the hard way, one flooded basement at a time, but I'd learned it. And that, in the end, was worth more than any generator, any victory, any righteous vindication. It was worth everything. The story of Lucas Oliver and the Willowbrook Estates HOA didn't have a tidy ending because life doesn't work that way. Margaret never came back. The neighborhood never fully forgave itself for what had happened. I never stopped feeling guilty about that night in the rain. But we all kept living, kept trying, kept building something better from the wreckage of our mistakes. And every time the power went out, every time my generator kicked on and my sump pump kept running and my basement stayed dry, I remembered. I remembered what I'd fought for, and what I'd lost, and what I'd learned. I remembered that being prepared isn't just about having backup power. It's about having backup humanity, backup kindness, backup grace. The generator beside my garage would keep running for years, protecting my home from the storms that would inevitably come. But the real protection, the real safety, the real community would come from the choices I made when the lights went out. The choice to help instead of hurt, to warn instead of watch, to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. Those choices wouldn't always be easy. They hadn't been easy yet. But they were the only choices worth making, the only path worth walking, the only way to build something lasting in a world that seemed determined to tear everything apart. So I made a promise to myself, standing in my driveway in the fading August light, looking at the generator that had caused so much trouble and taught me so much. I promised that the next time a storm came, the next time the power went out, the next time I had to choose between revenge and redemption, I'd knock on the door. I'd make the call. I'd be the person I wished I'd been a year ago. It wasn't much. It wouldn't fix what had happened to Margaret. It wouldn't repair all the damage that had been done. But it was something. A start. A foundation. A generator for the soul, ready to kick on when the darkness came and the floods threatened and the choice between right and easy presented itself once again. And this time, I'd be ready. Not with a generator. Not with bylaws or lawyers or righteous anger. But with something simpler and infinitely more powerful. The willingness to be a neighbor in the truest, deepest sense of that word. To care about the person next door even when caring is hard. Especially when caring is hard. That was the real lesson of Willowbrook Estates, the real victory over the HOA, the real triumph over Margaret Reynolds and her clipboard and her need for control. Not that I'd won, not that I'd kept my generator, but that I'd learned finally, painfully, what it meant to be part of a community. Not just to live near people, but to live with them. For them, because of them, the generator hummed beside my garage, ready for whatever came next, and so was I.